sorry. Excuse me for just one moment. Vinyl. Vinyl Scratch, open the door. You promised me you wouldn't do this. For buck's sake.
Hello, and welcome to the Heroic Review. This is the internet show where we, the cast of the Heroic Tales, discuss fanfiction, episodes, and other pony-related memorabilia. My name is DeadlyReg, and I'm the moderator for this particular discussion. Joining me is my panel of pony experts. We have Goombasa.
Hey there, everybody.
Reverb.
Hey there.
Scribbler.
Hello, everyone.
Webshoter.
Hello, everybody.
And me, DeadlyReg. This time we're going to be taking a look at the fanfic, The Incredibly Trying Performance of Octavia by Ponibus. As the picker of this particular fic, Webshoter will have the honour of introducing it. If you could take us through the blurb, please.
Thank you. In the elite circles of Canterlot, culture music is one of the essential luxuries for any pony with status. Octavia Philharmonica is one of the foremost classical musicians in Canterlot. Her music is at the very pinnacle of her profession. Her performances highly sought after, and her talents attract a steady string of wealthy and influential patrons. Her talent, however, is not always enough on its own. Occasionally, her job demands more. For the sake of pleasing one of her patrons, she must perform for a charity concert, a collaborative concert with her dubstep-loving friend Vinyl Scratch. She and Vinyl must find a way to weave their genres together to create a new style of music for their patrons, all while maneuvering the tricky and underhoof backstage politics of Canterlot society and the music world.
A winning Ponyverse story, yep. So, gang, we're going to just quickly talk about the tags, which in this case are comedy and slice of life. Do we think that's appropriate in 10 words or less?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. I don't know whose life this is a slice of, but Christ. And also comedy is...
It's not funny.
Neil.
Unfortunately, I am going to have to agree. The two tags don't match.
I don't even know what you would tag this with. Drama. It deserves the drama tag. And
Yeah, it's drama. Friendship, maybe.
If there was a drama tag, this would fit it.
I'm sure there is a drama tag, isn't there?
No, there isn't.
There should be.
No, I think that's one of the ones that Nighty didn't add.
Romance, sad, adventure. You could have adventure.
I guess this could be adventure.
It could be adventure. It was an adventure. Alright.
It was an adventure in how not to pop your own eyeballs rather than read it.
We're already starting with the hyperbole. Okay, can we have a quick opinion? Starting Goombasa.
Well, it was a story, and you can certainly read it, but it's the kind of thing that really doesn't leave any sort of impression on me whatsoever.
Reverb.
It's very trying.
Scribbler.
I didn't much care for it.
Webshoter.
Am I the only one that actually enjoyed this story?
Straw Poll says yes.
Yes.
We're sorry.
Then, yes, if anything, the story was enjoyable. To me, apparently.
Okay, Webshoter, before we get any further into this, we love you, and none of this is an impression of you, but we really don't like this story, and you're wrong. Okay, so...
Objection, Your Honor!
In my opinion, the blurb paints an excellent picture of the story to come, in that it's overly wordy, goes into too much detail on things that don't matter, and keeps saying the word patron over and over again. And on that count, I'm really pretty happy.
Hold it. No, actually, I'm going to have to disagree. It's not just patrons that gets overused, it's also I
and patron. Let's summarize the story. So, Octavia and Vinyl are asked to play at a concert, and they start getting ready to do it, but it feels like someone's sabotaging them and their friendship, but they fix it by hiding behind a curtain. The end.
It's basically an episode of Scooby-Doo.
It's basically Scooby-Doo.
It should be noted that DeadlyReg's summarization of the plot was much more concise than the story itself. The entire first chapter of this story is nothing but shenanigans with Vinyl and her mother, and Nightlight and Twilight Velvet.
Setup. It could have been done in like 3 paragraphs.
Now, this story is marked as being part of the Winningverse. And I'm not very familiar with the Winningverse, but I could see absolutely nothing that defined this as separate from main continuity. So is anyone who's familiar able to elucidate on what makes this a Winningverse tale?
I don't know the Winningverse well enough, but I'm going to guess and say it's something to do with Twilight's parents being part of the nobility.
Anyone who is an expert on the Winningverse?
I'm afraid not.
The thing is, I have read part of the original Winningverse story by Chengar Kordath. I've not finished it. It's actually really good. This doesn't bear any resemblance to it.
Well, given that we don't apparently know that much about the Winningverse as a group, we're best not delving into that too deeply. But I think we can all say that given that we're not familiar with this, we actually couldn't see anything that deviated enough from canon for us to think it was part of something larger. I think we can all say that pretty solidly.
I think it can be counted as a self-contained story.
Yeah, the whole aspect of nobility and patronage and those aspects of the story, none of those were too alien from what we've seen of the society. Certainly, you could imagine that the society, as portrayed in this children's cartoon, could have something of an obsession with status, given that they don't actually need money and they don't need clothes and they can eat grass. So really, at that point, all they're really doing is things for status. Also, but there are orphans. There are still orphans, so I guess. Scootaloo. So there does need to be something to look after the poor little orphans. Right, so let's talk about the chapter titles, because I looked one of them up and then I can't remember what the other 3 are. So what are the titles of the 3 chapters?
Cambiare, Accettato, and Harmony.
And what does the first 2 mean? Looking at you,
I haven't got
Webshoter.
a fucking clue.
Webshoter should have the notes, because I know he prepared.
Basically, cambiare is an Italian word for change. So
Yes, it can mean change or exchange.
Well, that's a lie.
I believe that the first one does match the first chapter due to the fact that we see that something different is about to happen.
What does the second word mean?
I do apologize for butchering this word. Associato, Acciacato. It's an Italian word meaning bruised.
It can also mean crushed.
That too.
And harmony is an English word meaning togetherness. So, in a way, it does model the flow of the story in that it goes from some kind of exchange to people getting crushed to once again being brought together. Do we think that that's an accurate summary of the story?
Fuck no!
Nope,
Because
not at all.
I would
no.
call the first part...
Boring part 1, second one boring part 2, and the third one
it would have
boring
been
part
first
3.
movement, talking, second movement, talking
over
third
drinks.
movement. This could be the entire
Talking
thing.
behind a curtain.
So my major issue with the first movement is that nothing happens. They go to a party, we're told repeatedly about the patron system. Now, the patron system, that's interesting, because it's very similar to the patron system of ancient Rome.
And not to be confused with the Patreon system.
No, which is used by horse-famous people to pay their taxes. Did any of us find anything interesting about the portrayal of equestrian nobility?
There is absolutely nothing in the droves of description in this first chapter that I haven't seen done in other stories that try to explore the nobility of Canterlot. I've seen fics focusing on Blue Blood and Upper Crust and Twilight's parents that not only manage to do the exact same thing that this story does, but does it much more concisely and without repeating itself over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I think this is probably a good point for us to move on to the repetitive writing. Scribbler?
I was just going to say that I've never seen that before. I've actually never seen the idea of the patron system because I don't read many fics about high society, so I like the concept, I just didn't like the execution.
Are you familiar with the patron system in, say, real-world politics?
No, I kind of worked it out from the story itself, but it might be an idea to explain it to me to see how accurate I was in my assumption.
No, it's not too dissimilar from what they've said. My major familiarity comes with ancient Roman society. The patron system, in its most cynical was essentially a kind of social welfare system in a way. People would go to their patrons' houses. They would be, I can't quite remember the word, not debtors exactly, but they would go to the house of their patron. Their patron would give them some money and maybe something to eat, and then they would be on their way. There would be people in Roman society who would literally just go from house to house collecting money from their patrons. And the point of the patron system then was simply the prestige of having people at your beck and call. So it was, you give people stuff in order to say that you've given people stuff. And that's more or less how it was in more ancient times.
Actually, now you've said it that way, there was a similar system in place in Elizabethan England as well, because Shakespeare was a patron.
Yes.
And there's a big debate about, of all the sort of love sonnets that he wrote, some of them were addressed to a young man, and there's been like a huge debate about whether or not this young man was a lover or was somebody he was patronising.
The patron system has generally always been people creating or doing something that nobles and those of wealth give them coin, money, favours in exchange for. So there's nothing really here that
makes more sense about why it's called Patreon now.
Yes, that's...
So pretty much this is nothing like a commission setup where...
No, it sounds like in that case, you would commission a person as opposed to a work.
Yeah, that's more or less the thrust of it. It's less of...
supporters, that's what I was looking for.
It's something of a supporter, but it in the Patreon, like, let's look at Patreon that we have these days. That's more of a crowdfunding effort than it is an actual patronage system. What you have with a patronage system is essentially a long-term commission with a person where you give them, say, lodgings, money, support, you take care of their needs, and in exchange, they are producing for you. So you could take an artist, make sure that all their needs are met, and every few months or so you check in to see what they have created because of you. And you can have bragging rights that you have, say, an artist living on your property that is creating these wonderful works of art. It was very popular during the Renaissance as well, the patronage system.
It sounds really interesting, actually, as a concept for Pony. Because I've not come across this concept before, that concept really intrigues me. I really wish that fic had been more about that.
Yes, that's why I started to get annoyed when it kept talking about patrons. Webshoter.
The patron system, it could have been done better, but reason being, I think it's been hammered in so many times in the stories because the author expected everyone to know already what was going on because, oh, hey, this is part of a story universe, the Winningverse, pretty much.
Goombasa?
But if they were trying to hammer it in, then they would be assuming that they didn't know anything about the Winningverse. And as we've already pointed out, when reading this, since most of us aren't really familiar with the Winningverse as a whole, we saw absolutely no distinction that would make this a part of the Winningverse. And the fact that it's just hammered in so much, even if we didn't know about the patron system before, the fact that it constantly repeats itself like this gets old really fast. You don't have to drill something like this into a person's head for them to remember it, regardless of whether or not we're familiar with the source material.
Especially since this story is actually focusing on Octavia from her perspective.
I would have preferred to read a story about Octavia navigating the patronage system rather than this story, which is not about that, and therefore
which is about Scooby-Doo with ponies.
This is about Scooby-Doo with the ponies.
Oh, the reason I think it's like a Scooby-Doo is because they introduced one antagonist. One antagonist who could possibly have been doing this, all the sabotage, and lo and behold, it was that person.
It was Old Man Jenkins.
What if it had been a ghost? What if a ghost had appeared and tried to scare them away?
I was hoping and praying it had been someone else, just so it would subvert my expectations, because from chapter 1, the moment that Uppercross mentioned Quaver as being their patronised artist, I was going, oh, I bet they're going to wreck it for them then. There was nothing about that in the synopsis, but I still got it. 2 chapters and 1,600 words before it happened.
There's so much foreshadowing in this.
No. Foreshadowing is where you imply through either tone or subtext that something is going to occur. This is outright telling you what is going to happen.
Well, yes.
Unfortunately, Quaver being the bad guy was something that you could see from the word go, basically at the beginning of the story.
Goombasa?
It's particularly egregious at this point because we're told about Quaver. We are told about her, but she is not introduced until the sabotage begins. We don't actually meet her until the 3rd chapter.
Actually, no.
We meet in chapter 1.
Oh, sorry.
She's introduced in chapter 2.
They mention her in chapter 1.
That just shows how little of an impact this fic has, if I can't even remember being introduced to her before she actually starts causing problems.
She was there, and every single bit of description, every adverb, every adjective, every action she performed, everything that was about her went, "This is the villain!
I gotta say,
Don't like this character. She's gonna be bad news."
I am really holding out for the Quaver spin-off where she gets her revenge. I'm looking forward to that. They could develop her as a character.
Once upon a time, there was a pony called Quaver. She did something wrong. She died in prison.
No,
in the
man,
end.
she's got buff. She's been doing press-ups in prison. She's got a scar from a rumble. She's been bulking up. She's going to get out, and she's going to run him over in a car.
She's also got the doctor's perception filter technique.
There's a comment where someone's actually requesting a Quaver spin-off from prison, where she writes her story.
Oh, yeah! Oh, I'd love to read that.
And then we have the pony version of Orange is the New Black.
I would watch that so hard, but enough of this. So, actually, this is a decent point where we should probably move to the pacing of the story, and I'm going to let Scribbler take the floor. Thank you, Scribbler. The pacing of the story was pretty slow, in that, when I say pretty slow, like, the Ice Age was pretty cold, the sun is pretty hot.
Hitler was a bit of a bad
Hitler was a bit of a bad one. Stalin did some naughty things.
Pol Pot was not a good guy.
This story took 3,000 words to get to a point that it didn't need to, and that's unforgivable. I mean, I'm trying to remember the last story that we read that was this slow. Goombasa.
It is a very, very, very slow story, but at other times it almost feels like it's trying to rush over some things. I'm thinking particularly about the point where the sabotage begins and the two of them immediately start thinking that maybe it's the other person who's doing it, the other pony. But they completely gloss over this, and it really leads nowhere because they make up just a scene later in the bar scene.
Over a Celestial Sunbomb special.
So it almost feels like it was trying to rush over the breakup and makeup part of this extremely cliched plot, just so that it could keep talking about things that didn't really matter in the long run.
I actually find it quite telling that the areas of the story where it sped up so significantly, that was the kind of pace that I wanted it to go on. And yet it just so slow.
The pacing was bloody awful because it took... The entire first chapter did not need to happen. It could have been a retrospective at the beginning of the second chapter. So much of this could have been summarised. One of the things about writing scripts that has taught me, and that's like a fairly recent thing that I've gleaned from this, is dialogue. When you have a scene that's dialogue heavy, and this entire fic is really dialogue heavy, you cannot then break narrative pacing to describe everything that's going on around and what that character is doing every single time, because it slows it down to the speed of sludge. It should have been that the dialogue was quite snappy, and then they broke off to tell us different things. We didn't need to know that Octavia blinked at any particular moment. We didn't need to know that at that moment Vinyl picked up her glass. We didn't need to know half of the things that we were being told because they weren't relevant. What was relevant was the dialogue, and the dialogue was being slowed down and made more uninteresting because of the author's attempts to cram in every detail they possibly could.
It also is very distracting the way that the author decides to tell us about things, because there's a huge section in the first chapter that is devoted to explaining Vinyl's origin story to us, about how she was a love child between a common woman, her mother, who was introduced in the first chapter, and a low-ranking noble. And that is something that just... It didn't need to be there, and it was also very awkwardly placed because, again, we were being told about it. even if this is from Octavia's perspective, she already knows this, so why is she just going over it again in her mind like that? And it has no relevance on the story later on either, so again, it's just completely egregious to me.
I'm going to make a point of bringing up two writers that I'm very fond of, despite their people not being particularly fond of them. That's Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who write for South Park, the creators of South Park. They did a short talk on how to write. And their biggest takeaway lesson was that if you're an amateur writer or you're not thinking very clearly, you produce bad work if you introduce a point and then you link it to the next point with "and then," or link it with "but then." If you put in something like that, you have a series of events that aren't linked with one another occurring sequentially. What you need is that every point links to the next point with "and because of this," or "and so." Every point you make links to the next point, and all of those points together make an overall picture. And what we have here is the unfiltered thoughts of Octavia. This is something I'm going to get into in terms of perspective, but at no point did I think these were a person's thoughts. This was a first-person description of their surroundings, and that really hurt the pacing of the story because there was no focus for anything that was going on. Scribbler?
That sort of links to what I was going to say next about repetitive writing, that, like you said, it's a description of events from the perspective of Octavia. And bloody hell did I hammer that one home. Every single paragraph, every single sentence, practically all of them started with I. I did this, I did that, I did this, then this happened, and I did this, and that. And it just seemed a really juvenile thing. There's a difference between being a juvenile person and having a juvenile writing style. You can be quite old in real life and still have a juvenile writing style because it's unrefined. Like you said, it's unfiltered thoughts. And a juvenile writing style is overly descriptive, bogs down its pacing, and has repetitive sentence structure. I generate entire lessons with my students about varying the way you start sentences, and that's basic writing. And this story really, really annoyed me because of that.
It's a point where you never repeat yourself. You're going to have two sequential, that you never repeat yourself in sentences, and the more you repeat yourself, the more noticeable it becomes, and people become more aware of the fact that you're reiterating the same points. It's a problem that I know even here on the Heroic Review, we have issue where we repeat the same points, and it stems from you not being confident in your ability to convey information accurately and quickly, being able to inform your audience without necessarily having to outright tell them.
Clearly, we're all just really, really lacking in confidence because we're all little wilting flowers.
Apparently so. All right, there's a point I wanted to bring up, which is the use of tense for the narrator. I don't know what reason the author had for using first-person tense here when third person was clearly the more logical use, based on the fact that the author has to drop in learning information to catch the audience up on the society that the character lives in, giving us further information on the characters around them. If you're having a first-person perspective, the reason you do that is because you want to have the story told from and the environment informed by the perspective of that character. But all that she does is relate in detail the events around her fairly neutrally. Webshoter?
So you're pretty much saying that first-person perspective is to not be overused. When it's overused, that's when the story itself can be derailed or debunked.
I almost wish that this fic had used a technique of another story that I had read a while ago, and I did a reading on this fic. The name of it is War Pigs, and it shifts perspective. It shifts tenses several times throughout the story, starting off in Celestia's mind, and then it shifts to a third-person view, but it makes sense because it's a breakaway segment where we're given a lengthy dialogue that is supposedly cut straight from a history book, and then it goes back to Celestia's perspective. And that works really, really well. If the structure of the chapters had been better for this story, I think that would have worked well. You could have used segments of it to tell us the history of the patron system, or Vinyl's history, through, say, these history books, rather than just having it all inside Octavia's head, where it sounds stilted and awkward and not at all like somebody's actually thinking this thing.
A technique that I'm not going to say is common, but certainly that we've all seen, is I think third-person narrator, where it's in a third person but taken almost entirely from the perspective, or entirely from the perspective of a single acting character. The most famous example of that I can think of is the Harry Potter books, where it's all from the perspective of Harry, but it's all in the third person so that we can be given information Harry doesn't know about the world around him, while at the same time it's still focusing on one individual's actions and reactions to the world around them. Third person limited is the correct use there. And I think third person limited would have been much better here. The author chose first person here because obviously it's conveying what Octavia's experiences are, but I really do think that was a very limiting step, and I think it's what in part makes so much of the dialogue and so much of the description seem so unnatural, is that it's portrayed to us as the thoughts of a character when these are not thoughts that a character would have. That is just an example of why the way you convey information is just as important as the information that you convey in a story.
More showing and not telling, basically, is what you're getting at.
It's not even so much that, it's how you show it. So if we're shown this information through the thoughts of Octavia, but if we're portraying this as these are the thoughts of this character, the reason that you have for portraying them as that through those characters' thoughts is in part to show in a different way. So if we're talking about the political system of Equestria, if you put it from a third person perspective, you can give objective information and you can show that way. But if you're giving it from the perspective of someone like Octavia or like Final Scratch, you can specifically couch all that information in terms that they would put them into. So how Octavia reacts to the patron system is as informative and different to how Vinyl reacts to the patron system of Equestria. They're both going to be hugely different reactions, and those reactions, just on their own, inform us about how that character thinks, and informs us about what that character's attitudes towards a lot of the events going on around them are. And by providing commentary, you can, by those characters' sort of deviating thoughts or tangential thoughts, you can convey even more about the characters that way. But you've got to be very aware when you write in the first person that the audience should expect you to write in the voice of that character. I think some of the problem we see with fiction is that when you see it in a first-person perspective, for some reason, we don't take for granted that it's a person's thoughts. It's almost like it's just a new set of pronouns. The use of it's not simply a choice of pronoun use. Those pronouns are also conveying information about that information, and that should be taken as read. That should be something that everyone expects when they come into a story, and it shouldn't be something where it can be needled at because it's not been done correctly. It should be extremely obvious when someone has put it in first-person perspective, but then not phrased anything that's being said in the perspective of the person who is thinking it.
It's pretty much like when something is described in first person, it should have a bit of colour to it.
It's not so much the colour. I mean, colour is the correct word, but that colour is, as I was saying, informing you about the person who's thinking.
Exactly.
The color in this story is grey and dull and boring.
Just like the mane and coat of Octavia.
Woohoo! We linked it.
Maybe it does work then.
I absolutely hate the use of music and text in this story, and I'm not fond of it in any story, really, because it's two different mediums, and I hate the fact that so many authors just try to combine them through description. In this story, we have Octavia and Vinyl trying to combine their two very different genres of music together to create something memorable and interesting. And what happens? We are told about what they come up with, but we are given absolutely no reason as to how they came up with it and why it is so special. Everything about this description that we are given is completely forgettable because you're telling me that they came up with it, but you're not showing me how they did it. Unless you provide me with a link to the music itself, or give me a physical CD that I can listen to while I'm reading these words, it means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I'll echo the point that the creation of the music, it's hard to speak with authority about something that you don't know. And I'm making wild assumption about the background of the writer here. But there was no specific discussion about the nature of the music other than talking about bass line and how the I'm going to say wubs and feel bad about myself, but how the wubs interacted with the cello.
A way that I've seen this done very well, actually, when you talked about the author not knowing that much about musical terms and how to describe it. If you want a very good example of how this can be done well, and how a text story can really draw you in and get you to feel something about the music, I would really recommend Pascal White's Duet in the Folk Style, which is an Octavia Big Macintosh fic. The way that it handles it is actually very interesting, because in that story, Big Mac has a condition called synesthesia, which causes him to see sounds as color. It's a perfect way of showing us music through words, because now we see what Big Macintosh is seeing. He is literally seeing the music, and he sees it in terms of colors. So that is a great way of describing music in that fic, and it works really, really well in that instance.
Yeah, I'm going to echo for a moment a story that I think did music through text really well was, and I've forgotten the title of it, but Goombasa did a reading of it, and it was about Buttercoat Bluey. Fiddlesticks! I love Fiddlesticks! Go read Fiddlesticks, it's great. And they didn't do a lot with music, but they made it about music. And whenever there was music in it, they conveyed it very convincingly without actually having to get into any real technical work. Reverb?
I just wanted to add a point to what Goombasa was saying before. You mentioned in that other fic how Big Macintosh was able to see music in colour. I feel they tried to do something rather similar with this, with the actual performance, and they sort of conveyed it as light and dark a lot. I could see what they were trying to do. I don't think it had the same effect that it could have, or what they were going for. Do you guys know the part I'm talking about?
The major issue with that scene is we don't know anything about the music, and I feel like there was so little attention paid to the actual music itself compared to their attitudes towards the music that actually showing us the performance itself came out of kind of nowhere. I don't think the fic was helped by it.
I can point out one story I know of that did it. It was describing a performance of Octavia and Vinyl together, and I think it did it really well. And it's sort of tantamount to this in that it was a stage performance, and it was meant to be a big emotional impact, and it was meant to reflect something about the characters and show the fruition of their labours and things. And that was A Silent House by, I think, Pale Horse. It's a story in which Vinyl and Octavia, it's a pre-established couple, but Vinyl has died, and Octavia is dreaming and remembering this concert they had, where they'd worked for months together to produce a concert that was a complete symbiosis of their two sounds and worked really well, and went down really well with the crowd. And it's the opening scene, and it's quite a long scene, but by the same token, you understood how the music was significant to them. So reading about what the music sounded like didn't bother me over much, because it was also linked to them and their relationship and their personalities. And I didn't get that from this.
A Silent House was written by Enter Madness.
Enter Madness. Okay.
And yeah, there is an opening scene. It's about 200 words long, and it doesn't actually discuss the music so much as it discusses their reaction to how their playing interacts with one another. So I think that it does so much better than this story. I'm sorry, this story, but you are not as good as that story where Vinyl is dead. So even in death, she outperforms your Vinyl. So we've decided that this story does not do so well with the music and the text. Goombasa.
As an addition to that discussion, I would also like to point out to other authors, dropping the lyrics into your story does not help that much either, because it doesn't give you the right to just ignore discussing the music, just dropping the lyrics into your story, because when you do that, all I'm seeing is a bunch of words that vaguely make up a poem, and that's all I'm seeing.
Scribbler?
I would say if you're ever thinking of putting lyrics into a video, if you're thinking of dropping song lyrics into it, don't!
Yeah, don't put lyrics to Fall Out Boy songs in the middle of your story about gay horses, because then I have to sing
not even
it.
that. Making you sing Fall Out Boy was amazing, but no. It's when people make up their own songs and they've clearly got something in their head of what these lyrics are meant to go with. But we as readers don't know that. So your absolutely heart-wrenching lyrics about friendship and love and madness and wonder, and it's basically bad emo poetry.
Goombasa?
Again, another story that did this relatively well was Fire and Rain, which is a Rainbow Dash and Spitfire shipfic. I did a review of it a while ago. Really good story, and almost every single chapter has lyrics of a real song put into it. But the reason why I say it did it relatively well is because, like I pointed out in my original point when we were just talking about discussing the music, is because the author at least had the courtesy to put a link to every single song that he included, so that we as the audience could hear the song and we could kind of get what he was going for when he put the lyrics into the chapter.
I guess what we're saying is, don't write a song and then try and put it into a story. Just learn to write poetry. That's the written words equivalent of a song.
And leave it out of your pony fic.
And leave it out the pony fic, unless it's really good poetry, which...
No, not even then.
What we're
not
saying
even
is,
then.
give up on
Just
your dreams.
No,
Give up
no.
now. Webshoter.
Basically, to summarize you guys' point, if us, the readers, do not even know what song is you're basing the event off of, or we cannot imagine the music, or even get a glimpse of what it is that you're trying to portray through music and writing, then unfortunately it's going to fall on deaf ears, so to speak.
The major issue here is that the song didn't matter until the author decided it did. I'm going to make a similar point on the bit where Vinyl Scratch falls out of a cupboard in this fic that was not a wacky cartoon until that point, and then it was a wacky cartoon, and then it wasn't again. People don't fall out of cupboards unless it's a comedy, and then it doesn't have to make sense. But this wasn't a comedy. Not even in your wild...
How the tag say it was.
The tags say it was.
It
The
tried
tags
to
also
be.
said it was slice of life. But I would dispute that as well.
You never been to a frat house then.
No.
People fall out of closets and cabinets all the times.
I get a feeling that was when the author remembered it was a comedy.
I'm going to suggest that they should have had the tags dark tragedy, because I wasted 45 minutes reading this thing.
Well, building off of that vinyl falling out of the cupboard, do we want to discuss drinking in Scratchtavia fics? I think that was something we wanted to cover.
Oh, God.
How many Scratchtavia fics have we all read here, and in how many of them does Vinyl
Lots.
get hammered, either in a bar or elsewhere, while Octavia looks on disapprovingly?
Almost every single one.
I would say like 75% of them. I would say I've read a lot or listened to a lot or just seen a lot. And comics as well. It's always Vinyl getting drunk. I know, as a teetotaler, I don't get it. What's the obsession with being drunk?
Goombasa?
I think it mostly has to do with the fact that the fanon interpretation of Vinyl Scratch is that she is a party pony. And apparently, along with that, she can't just be a pony who loves to go to nightclubs and loves to dance or loves to play music. That also comes with being a functioning alcoholic, because anybody who parties hard is also going to do a lot of excessive drinking.
Do you reckon it's got anything to do with Allegrezza being the very first Scratchtavia fic?
Does Vinyl drink a lot then?
Yeah.
The entire first few chapters are about them getting drunk.
Okay. Maybe they should do a fic where Vinyl just does a lot of coke. Yeah, there you go. Mixed up the characters.
There is.
Oh, is there? Fantastic.
And then hallucinates
Okay,
some music.
Coke doesn't make you hallucinate.
How would you know?
Because I'm a chemist, Thank you.
Okay, that was a boring
There's
answer.
not like a big bit in my medical thing where like we don't believe in drugs, so we don't even know how they work. We just guess, and we leave anyone who looks like they might be on drugs to die.
That's basically how most people who write drug-related fanfictions function.
And then she had a sniff of the marijuana and she died. The end. Hashtag say no 420.
Yes, that's how 90% of drug fics end.
No, I am at least somewhat informed.
Oh my god.
Reverb.
I've got something quickly to add about the music.
Go for it.
I think it's really, really ridiculous that in just 2 weeks, while being sabotaged no less, they fully create from scratch a 2-hour concert, which is huge. It's a massive...
Oh, it's 2 hours long.
Yeah, a huge 2-hour concert, which is absolutely huge. And then when the actual concert was done, they described maybe the first half of the first song. I suppose they could have gone into a bit more detail about the struggle of a 2-hour concert, only having 2 weeks to prepare for it. I mean, you went back to before to possibly assuming that maybe the author doesn't have as much of a history in writing music, but that's a pretty massive thing. I mean, even coming up with a new song or two in 2 weeks, which would go for a total of maybe 10 minutes.
I can understand why the author didn't go into too much detail on the concert, because they wouldn't want their readers to get bored, now would they? Haha! That was a light-hearted joke.
Yes, it's totally not bitter.
Webshoter, off you go.
Well, I was going to point out is apparently Vinyl had already had some things already pre-planned for that event. So as to possibly them not being able to pull it off in 2 weeks, don't know.
Also,
but...
all their equipment kept getting sabotaged. Had that going against them.
I like how just one coin was going to buy her an entire new sound system the day of the concert.
It was actually a bag of coins. It was a purse.
No, I'm talking in terms of time. Setup and testing and making sure everything's in tune and everything else.
That's true. If it's entirely new equipment, you have to take into account any differences between even the same brand or manufacturer.
Exactly.
Reverb?
I love how a single magic spell can fix a cello twice. That's been stepped through. I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
You know,
hilarious.
Given that, you'd be surprised why they have any concern about entropy at all. They should probably just train everyone to do that spell, and then there would be no need or want ever again.
But that's when they start making entertainment that breeds entropy, and that's when we get pony cage fighting.
Oh, I would watch pony cage fighting. They'd be so adorable.
I would so totally watch pony cage fighting.
Goombasa.
A lot of people in the fandom sometimes bring up the idea of why Octavia and Vinyl would be together if their tastes and their music and their personalities are so opposite. And we've discussed this before, how it is a trope of fiction that opposites attract. But the thing about it is, in a good story, despite them being opposites, you feel a deep connection between them, whether it's romantic or friendship or whatever. You know that there is a connection between them, and you can see how they would find common ground and get along. In this story, I got absolutely none of that, and it made me feel like their relationship, even though it was just friendship this time around, it felt very, very fabricated.
Yeah, the dialogue felt very stilted, and I don't know anything about Ponibus, but like I said before, juvenile writing style, it felt like something that you would write if you're not entirely sure how to write an established relationship. Like if you don't know how to write an established friendship, so you just put down random phrases. If you're not entirely sure how to write somebody with Vinyl's background, you'll just put in yeah instead of you every so often.
The word awesome.
Or wubs and various different... It's like white people trying to write rap music.
Oh my god, that's so true! There was a moment that PDK was reading the story to me to help me get it done in time when I was on my way to work. And there's a moment where Quaver looks at Vinyl's equipment and says something like, well, I guess you're not everything that you were reported to be. And Vinyl's like, yo, don't diss the wub wagon. And PDK said, what I expect Vinyl to say was, why don't you go yourself, you and then give her a kick. Vinyl doesn't stand for this And it's like the vinyl in this story is so passive but at the
She
same
doesn't
time,
feel like vinyl.
yeah, she's just some
You can't
person
just make
who says wub.
Yes! You can't just make her say wubs all the time and awesome and...
Oh, yeah, doesn't a character make?
No, because that's Rainbow Dash's catchline.
Goombasa?
I feel really dirty for saying this, but I almost feel like this story would have been better if it had been a Klopfic, because then at least there would be something interesting happening between the two of them.
Like, when are these guys gonna come on?
Oh my god.
Get through.
Exactly!
Well, at least then you're getting through the boring bit to get to the clop at that point. Not just boring,
We got through
end.
22,164 f***less words. Nobody got anything, put up anything, unsubscribed.
Don't forget about the Quaver spin-off.
Oh, the Quaver spin.
It can happen there.
Now with prison rape.
Oh,
If it's orange is the new black.
Quaver's Prison Adventures. I'll get those commissioned ASAP. Okay. In more ways than one, we have finished discussing this story.
Sorry, Webshoter.
I'm not sorry at all.
The important thing is we all know about the patron system, and we all know how not to phrase things in a first person. And if nothing else, it's given us that. Also, we also agree that Quaver should have appeared as like a ghost or a pirate or something.
There's one more thing. We have learned, do not overuse the word I.
Do not overuse I.
And do not say something's in the Winningverse if it's not in the Winningverse.
It is in the Winningverse in the same way that I am in the Winningverse because I said the word bang.
Also, be sure to pace your stories really well.
Basically, don't do this.
Yeah, this fic, don't do this.
Also, one last add-on. If you're going to write something about music or anything, take the time to do the research. Research what it is that you're putting into your story, poem, whatever. Take the time to look it up.
That's a valid point that if you are doing something that you don't know very much about, research is the single most important thing you can ever do as a writer.
I think that's a good note to leave on because that's a lesson most fic writers need.
Well, don't do too much research because then you're just going to sound really mechanical when you're writing about it, like every Klopfic ever.
That's true. If you're going to talk about vaginas and you're going to talk about butts, know what they look like and how they work. This is to both of you sexes. You really have to get in there and work things out. Okay.
It says a lot about this fic that the last thing we're ending on is advice on how to write clop.
All right, that is our review. Thank you for listening. We were the Heroic Review. Joining me this week was Goombasa.
Bye, all.
Reverb.
Take care.
Scribbler.
Be lovely to each other, and good night, everybody.
Webshoter.
See you all in the future, and I'm turning in my defense attorney badge.
I was your highly opinionated moderator, DeadlyReg, and thank you for listening. All right, that's our review. Shut this baby down.
And cringe.
My roommate is a bassist, and perhaps we're not so different, she and I. Genre be damned. It's the music that drives us, the harmonies that bind us, the friendship that found us.